Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the stories and please subscribe. Several years ago, I worked as a security guard in a towering office building in the heart of downtown Chicago. It was early December, and the tenants in the building were starting to put up their holiday decorations, which were kept in the basement along with other storage. Most of the time, I stood in the lobby area of the building to act as general security. It was usually uneventful, and for the most part, a boring job. But on one bitterly cold December day, everything changed. An advertising firm on one of the upper levels of the building was having its holiday party. An employee at the firm had gone down to the basement to pick up some Christmas decorations and reported that all the lights were out and the elevator wasn't running to the basement floor. This sounded to me like an electrician's job, until I was also told there were multiple broken doors down there, indicating a possible break-in over the weekend. That's when it became my job to go down there and investigate. Since the elevator wasn't working to that level, I would have to take the stairs. I was going down there alone since I was the only security guard on duty that night. I took a flashlight with me since the power was out. I'd be lying if I said this wasn't nerve-wracking. The basement was filled with supplies, electrical components, and janitorial equipment. It was a small maze of corridors with different rooms, and navigating this in the dark, armed with nothing more than a flashlight, was making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. There were different doors in the corridors leading to storage rooms for the many businesses. And sure enough, many of these doors were bashed in. Some of them were so badly damaged that they looked like they were destroyed with a sledgehammer. This was more serious than I had initially thought. I was just a security guard. I didn't make enough money to go searching for potentially dangerous people in the basement without a gun. I cautiously peered into the rooms with the damaged doors, but each one still seemed full of supplies. I couldn't find any trace of theft, but someone clearly came down here with a purpose. I continued looking into each room, peeking in with my flashlight for a second or two. That's when I heard a slam from somewhere in the basement. Then everything went dead silent. And I mean everything. The normal basement noises I heard before, the boiler, the water pipes, whatever it was, all stopped. There was nothing. Every footstep of mine seemed amplified, bouncing through the darkened hallway. The realization hit me with chilling clarity. I was not alone. Someone else was down here with me, as that slam didn't happen on its own. This wasn't a crime that happened over the weekend. This was happening right now. Stupidly, I called out, "Anyone here?" My voice echoed down the dark, deserted corridor. I continued to slowly move back the way I came. I wasn't staying down there another minute. This was the job for the police. I was almost to the stairs when I heard heavy breathing from around the final corner. I was scared shitless and wondering how I'd gotten myself into this predicament. I turned off my flashlight and tiptoed a little closer to the corner to look around. That's when I noticed the breathing had stopped. I said, "Hello" again, and then, with a mixture of curiosity and fear, I turned on the flashlight again. The beam of my light revealed a towering, hunched-over figure facing the wall with some kind of long object in his hand. It could have been a sledgehammer. It could also have been a weapon. As soon as the light touched him, he turned. Clad in a Santa hat and topcoat, his face was unnaturally long and pale, creating an eerie distortion of festive cheer. I recoiled, my heart racing, as I sprinted past him, shouting hollow threats about the police being on the way. I ran back up the stairs through the basement door, locking it behind me. I then called the police. A large group of officers descended on the building. I explained what I saw in the basement, and 3 or 4 of the cops drew their guns and flashlights and headed down there. I remained in the lobby with the other officers. Once was enough for a guy making barely above minimum wage. I was still standing in the lobby when the officers came back alone. They claimed they couldn't find anyone down there. By this point, one of the building's electricians had shown up to fix the electrical issues in the basement. Apparently, the circuit box had been tampered with. But even with the lights back on, the police still couldn't find anyone down there. He likely got out the way he got in, with no one having a clue how. The events of this night took place during the annual Christmas party held at this prestigious country club that my parents belonged to. I was 16, and the oldest of my siblings who were pretty much still kids. Traditionally, somebody would dress up as Santa Claus and hand out presents to the younger children. The gifts were usually kept in a large sack, placed on a table, and covered with a red blanket. My dad's best friend Jerry was dressing up in the iconic red suit this year. He was sitting at the same table as us, so when the time came for him to change, I saw him discreetly exit, unnoticed by the other kids. Everyone was having a good time, chatting, laughing, and watching the younger ones play around on the floor in the center of the room. When the door to the banquet room opened and bells were heard jingling, all the kids jumped up yelling, "Santa!" Jerry made his entrance in a surprisingly unimpressive Santa costume. It honestly looked like the cheapest thing he could find at Party City, a severe downgrade from last year. The hat and beard were right, but the costume just seemed cheap, different from the usual costume the club supplied. Jerry was a guy that did his own thing. Maybe he thought it was cool. At least he'd had the Santa voice down, disguising his own like a pro. But as he chatted with the kids, the room became increasingly uncomfortable, like he'd had too many eggnogs, everyone on edge waiting for something really bad to happen. Little kids can be nervous meeting Santa. I cried the first time I was placed on the fat man's lap at the mall, but adults were supposed to have grown out of it. Jerry chuckled in a way that was supposed to sound jolly, grabbed the bag of gifts and said in his best Santa voice he'd be right back. Then he disappeared with the presents. That's when my dad and a couple of other guys ran after him, yelling, "Hey!" I followed my dad out the door, where I saw him standing with the others, looking around, bewildered. I asked him what's going on, and that's when he told me he didn't think that was Jerry in the Santa costume. Jerry, or whomever that man was dressed as Santa, had vanished. Equally disturbing, his car was gone. Calls to his cell phone were unanswered. We walked around the property, but couldn't find Jerry anywhere. We also tried calling his house phone, but it too went straight to voicemail. No one wanted to continue on with the now uncomfortable evening, and they started leaving one by one. As my dad returned to the banquet room to pick up my mom and siblings, I waited outside, staring off into the dark woods just beyond the lawn. No one had bothered checking in there since the consensus was Jerry had jumped in his car for some reason and took off. Maybe it was my teenaged imagination, but the night still felt like it had something worse to offer. That's when I heard it, a weak howl from the trees drifting across the wind. Drawing closer, I heard it again, a feeble cry for help coming from deep in the woods. I hollered Jerry's name, and this time it came back to me clearly. "Help!" he yelled back again. It was him, all right. Ignoring the impulse to fetch my dad, I raced towards the sound, calling out for Jerry. His cries eventually guiding me to the terrifying scene. Tied to a tree, Jerry was a vision of horror, bloodied and battered, his forehead showing signs of being hit with some blunt object. Fumbling with my house keys, I cut the flimsy rope and he struggled to his feet. I helped him back to the parking lot where he was startled to see his car was missing. Jerry explained that when he left the building, planning to get changed into his Santa costume, he was jumped by 3 guys wearing ski masks. One of the guys struck him in the forehead with a club repeatedly until he was knocked unconscious. The next thing he knew, he woke up tied to a tree in the woods. We waited with Jerry until the ambulance took him to the hospital. Then my dad and I went to his house. It was ransacked. His car was gone, along with everything else of value. The demented man in the red suit had even taken the presents under the Christmas tree. From that night on, I went back to fearing Santa. This happened a few years ago. I was 17 at the time and in my last year of high school. It was the weekend before Christmas, and my parents had left to visit some family, which gave me the perfect opportunity to throw a raging holiday party. I went to the store and stocked up on holiday decorations, red and green Solo cups, and bags of Christmas cookies and candy. I also got my older brother, Gavin, who was 21, to pick up a bunch of beer and liquor. Our house was located in a quiet cul-de-sac with an empty lot behind it, which made it a great spot for a party without the neighbors complaining about the noise. People started showing up around 9 p.m. I had sent out open invites to most of the kids in my grade. By midnight, there were probably 70 or 80 kids in the house. Plus, Gavin had invited about 10 or 12 of his friends. It got a little more unruly and crowded than I'd anticipated, finally reaching a point where I was seeing a lot of people I didn't know. Concerned about party crashers, I started locking the door after the guests left to keep anyone else from just walking in. Later in the night, when the crowd had thinned to about 20, my friend Lewis mentioned seeing someone he didn't recognize heading upstairs. Concerned, I questioned him about it. He insisted he saw some random guy walking up the stairs just a minute ago. The upstairs was supposed to be off limits. Nervously, I ran up to check all the rooms. They were all dark and appeared empty. I went back downstairs and told Lewis, but he insisted that someone was still up there. We both went up this time, checking under the beds and in the closets, but we still didn't find anyone. Lewis, who'd had way too much to drink, went over and crashed on the couch, and I began to doubt his claim about somebody walking around up there. By this point, all the guests had left, leaving just Gavin, Lewis, and me in the house. Gavin was already asleep in his room upstairs. I went to use the upstairs bathroom, feeling exhausted and still slightly buzzed from the party. As I brushed my teeth, I thought I heard a noise above me. I stopped brushing and listened intently, but heard nothing more. I finished up and headed to my room. That's when I heard a distinct thump coming from the ceiling. In a panic, I knocked on Gavin's door, but he didn't answer. Suddenly, it occurred to me to check the attic. Surprisingly, I had never actually been up there before. Pulling down the attic stairs, I climbed into the darkness, feeling around for a light switch. My hand found a string, and I pulled it, lighting the attic with a dim light. The center of the room was well lit, but the edges remained covered in darkness. Despite this, I got this weird feeling there was someone else in there. "Is anybody in here?" I called out. To my shock, a box in the corner toppled over, revealing a crouched figure, an adult man, who darted behind another stack of boxes. At the same time, I heard the rustle of a plastic bag from another corner. Panicked, I nearly toppled down the stairs and slammed the attic door shut. I rushed to wake Lewis, explaining the situation. With fear in his eyes, he urged me to call the police, which I did. We went back upstairs to try and wake my brother, but he remained passed out and of no help. Just then, police sirens sounded outside. We ran downstairs to meet the officers, who asked about the attic. I led them to it, and they climbed up there with flashlights and guns drawn, telling us to wait in the living room. Within minutes, they came back down with 2 disheveled men, likely homeless and appearing dangerous. They glared at us as they were escorted out. My brother, who had finally woken up, was shocked to hear what had happened. Fortunately, being 21, he could speak with the police, allowing us to keep the whole thing from our parents. It was really one hell of a way to start the Christmas holidays. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe.